remember we were kind of showed them the story, went to their office, showed them the story, and I'll bleep myself here, but one of the guys was saying as we were left the boardroom, was like just walking back out to the exit afterwards. He's like, I was thinking, just like beep off. There's absolutely no way. And then he's like, as you were going through the whole story of what you're planning on doing and how you're going to do it, he's like, I was just getting more and more and more on board with everything as you were explaining.
Hi everyone, I'm your host Rohit Bhargava, and you are listening to episode 170 of the Startup Playbook podcast, a podcast series where I sit down with successful tech founders, investors, and operators to unpack their journey, lessons, and insights to help current and future entrepreneurs. Before we get into this episode, I did want to address the elephant in the room, which is why I haven't published a podcast episode for the last year. The truth is that I've actually been deep in building mode, building a new startup, and the voice that you heard a little bit earlier was that of my co-founder, Pete Davis. Together we've built One Future Football, and as you might have seen a couple of weeks ago, we recently came out of stealth to announce our $3 million pre-seed funding round led by Blackbird. We've wanted to tell our story in a little bit more detail about our vision and our journey so far, and are so excited to finally get to do that on this podcast here today for the first time. So what exactly is One Future Football? Well, we've built the world's first global football league. We've got 12 teams that are located all over the world in traditional footballing markets like a team in London, a team in Paris, a team in Buenos Aires in Argentina, but also where there's a lot of fandom and engagement in football, but not real representation to top tier level competition. So for example, we've got a team in Lagos in Nigeria, a team in India, Indonesia, and so on. And like with any other football league in the world, these teams go head to head in competition. But where things are a little bit different is that instead of having real people kicking around a football inside a stadium, we've created 252 CGI-generated athletes that all have their own looks, names, attributes, personalities, and backstories. Results are decided by a data science-led match engine, which we then convert into an 8 to 10 minute broadcast designed for the way that GenZs in particular engage with content. So something that's shorter, more highlight, storyline, and narrative driven, that we add professional commentary from the likes of Clive Tyldesley over the top. Our real value proposition, however, is changing the way that fans can engage with the sport that they love. Through our player cards, fans can earn points every time their players play in matches, decide on their training and development, and even their contract offers. And via our club credits mechanism, they can become co-owners of their favorite team, alongside ambassador owners like Naomi Osaka, Nick Kyrgios, Steve Smith, Chris Smalling, Kamaru Usman, Patrice Evra, and so many more people. As you can imagine, there's a lot of detail to get through. The last year has been a wild ride, and we tried to touch on as many things as possible in this podcast episode. In this episode, we discuss topics like Pete's background prior to 1FF in sports, as well as running multiple different businesses, the importance of doing your life's work, the 1FF fundraising journey, the trade-off of building in stealth, how to attract your first key hires, and building an in-house and remote culture, and so much more. And finally, before we get into this podcast episode, I just wanted to give a big shout out to Sender. I run all of my personal and business accounting through them and can say from first-hand experience how great it is to have their expertise in our corner. They're so much more than just a traditional accounting firm and have a dedicated focus on founders, funders, and startups. They can help you with everything from managing your tax and balancing your books to even helping with your exit strategy. To find out more, head over to sender.com. All right, with that out of the way, I'm so excited to bring you this episode, so let's get straight into it. Here's my episode with Pete Davis. Hi, Pete. Welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast. Glad to finally make this happen. And thanks so much for taking time to be on the show today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Very different to just how we normally just sit right next to each other in the office.
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, we're, like you said, we sit next to each other every day. We chat every day. But Pete, for those people that maybe aren't as familiar with you or your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
Yeah, so my career started in sport. So I always worked in sport initially in the UK, and then moved over to Australia, to Melbourne, worked with like the Western Bulldogs and then the Melbourne Racing Club and IMG, and worked on like the commercial program around the Australian Open. And we brought Tiger Woods out to play in the Masters and worked on the commercial program for things like that. And then my wife and I started a social media agency back when the pitch was, this is Facebook and this is how brands can use Facebook to reach new customers. And so it was kind of one of the very early days social agencies here in Australia and probably around the world. And so because we were like the new kids on the block at that point in time, and the the ones who knew what was going on, and no one really had any experience in that area. We were able to pick up some really big clients like very, very quickly. And so over the course of the next 6-ish years, we built that team up. We had 20 staff in an office in Melbourne and lots of very big name clients. And then we ultimately sold that business to private equity. So just had the right opportunity to exit, worked well. And then, I did some work in tech like after that, which I'm sure we'll dive into. And bringing it all around to where we are right now. So I kind of talk about it a little bit, that it's kind of the collision of sport, tech, and social is a lot of what I think goes into what we're doing right now.
Obviously, we'll kind of dive into a lot of the 1FF stuff in this episode, but maybe just kind of jumping to the first startup that you kind of launched, which I think was around the time, if I remember correctly, when we first met, was like the early days of AmpJar. I think it was called Posty back then. Do you want to share a little bit about that company and your kind of journey with AmpJar?
Yeah, so AmpJar was kind of just born out of, I think, being on agency side. I'm sure lots of people have kind of seen that transition of people running very hands-on agencies and kind of getting paid by the month to do a schedule of stuff for brands. And I think a lot of people see then tech opportunities within that. And that was sort of what bore the start of what was called Posty. We were goposty.com, just trying to find that right way to have the .com, but also do something else around it. We've all seen it. Could have put the ly on the end, something like that. But it was just one of those things, I think, where saw an opportunity to do something. The opportunity was in the very sexy area of email marketing, and particularly helping small businesses with email marketing. The whole thing was we automatically built emails for brands using their most popular social content, and mostly aiming that kind of small SMB kind of world. And we built a decent following, we built a decent customer base, but probably found that there was like a graduation point where brands got to a size that was then, all right, well, now we need abandoned cart emails, of course, and now we need onboarding sequences, and now we need this and this and this, and we had to keep on saying to our customers, it's like we don't do that. We haven't built Klaviyo or MailChimp overnight. You should go and use this. You should go and use that, which is nice to do, but not great for the bottom line. So that then evolved to, we've got all these brands that are brilliant little brands run by all these incredible entrepreneurs, and who were probably, it was about 97% women-run businesses as well. It was this whole big audience and community of these brilliant founders who had these brands that were so wholesome and interesting. We then decided to say, well, what if we drew lines between these brands? What if there was a way for cross collaboration to happen? And so we built all this range of cross collaboration tools, which the whole thing was about reaching new customers, not just engaging your own. And it worked pretty well. So I went through the process then of joining Jason Calacanis's launch incubator in San Francisco. After meeting him he did Launch Sydney. I can't remember when it was, maybe 2018, 19.
2018 sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah. So went to that, pitched it on stage after just DMing him on Twitter. He said, yeah, cool, come and pitch on stage. And then he pulled me and maybe 4 or 5 others up on stage at the end. I was literally had my backpack on at the back of the room, ready to go and get my flight back to Melbourne. Pulled us all up on stage and said, in that kind of, he loved it, in that kind of Oprah Winfrey style, like, you get a car. It's like, you're coming to San Francisco. And it was, so he basically did the whole acceleratory thing where it gave us $100K for 7% of the company, that typical structure. And said, come over to San Francisco on these dates and be a part of this accelerator, which the structure of which is very, very different to what I have known an accelerator before to be. Like I've done stuff with Techstars and obviously know of the Rolls Royce of Startmate in Australia as well. But very, very different to that. The whole structure was 12 weeks, and every Thursday we went to his lawyer's offices, and there was a room with a bunch of investors across the front table who all represented massive firms with huge amounts of money that they had able to deploy. and it was like a structured pitch kind of model. So 3-minute pitch to the minute, to the second, and then you took a question from everyone across the front of the room, and you had 2 minutes to then answer those questions. So you took all the questions, and then you were on the clock for 2 minutes to answer them all in like back to back to back, and that was it. And then it was see you next Thursday. And so there was every now and again we'd do something in between, but it was all about just that 5 minutes on a Thursday of you just putting your business out there. And it was just hardcore fundraising. It wasn't particularly like business building in terms of coaching. Jason knows what his superpower is, and his superpower is pulling people into a room who will have capital, who will fund your business and will get you going. And so that's exactly what we did. We got funded through that process, met some incredible companies, and kicked into then running that business.
I think it might be worthwhile diving into your experience with accelerators as well, because I know for a lot of early stage founders, that's often a big decision making point for them. And I actually remember Jason at the Launch Sydney event as well, talking about some of the terms that were offered by accelerators at that time and how like not founder friendly they were. But yeah, I guess from your perspective, obviously you mentioned that you're involved with Techstars as well, and having gone through Launch, like I guess any advice or things that founders should look for if they are considering joining an accelerator program, or kind of weighing whether to go down that path or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to go into it with having a very, very clear set of goals, and like narrow goals, not I'm going to meet my co-founder and I'm going to take this from A to B and I'm going to raise a round of capital in 12 weeks. Like, it's just not going to happen in that way. So I think that if you go into eyes wide open on what you're there to do, then I think the right thing to do is to talk to people who have been through that accelerator, not just the ones that had a brilliant time, but like others. And like, look at, everyone announces the cohort, right? So look at a cohort from a couple of sequences or a couple of cycles ago, and reach out to them and ask them some questions, and understand if you got what they got, would you be happy with that? And again, I think what's beautiful about Jason's structure was, it's great being in San Francisco, like getting to the heart of that ecosystem and all those things, and great to meet other startups that are at similar stages who become friends for life and all that stuff. That's cool, but the process of raising capital, obviously so many people find it so difficult, and it is very difficult. The ability to say, this is the tax that we're going to put on that in exchange for us lining everything up for you to be able to do this. And so, I don't know what the fundraising environment for that kind of structure looks. I don't know how it looks these days. Like right now, obviously it's a tough market right now for early stage financing and maybe those follow-on rounds. But I think if you go in eyes wide open and you say, that's exactly what I want to get, that's 7% off the back of them being able to raise at the terms that you could raise at, and very different terms often in the US versus Australia. Like often you see different terms through different early rounds. If you're happy to wear that tax, then it's not bad, right? It's probably a pretty strong way to make that call. And again, to the other side of things, if you wanted to get really smart about how you're going to structure your business and really understand things and put yourself in the right frame and the right model to be able to capital raise or to be able to make the right decisions that are going to help grow your business, then there might be another accelerator that does that very, very well for you. So yeah, I mean, I'm an advocate. You just need to go in eyes wide open and understand, am I right for this? And is this right for me?
No, I love that. Great advice. I don't know if we've ever spoken about this directly, but having gone through like my own journey with Stage Label before, like I know how all consuming running any startup is, and I think you were doing AmpJar for about 4 years in the end, and I believe you had a team of about 20 people or so. And then I was trawling through the emails about when we first spoke about 1FF, and you'd mentioned that you were kind of in the process of sort of transitioning out of AmpJar and working on something new. Just on a personal level, curious to understand, what was that process like for you in kind of deciding to kind of make that change and jump into something new? Was that an easy decision to get to, given the time and energy that you'd put in? Was it a difficult kind of transition? Well, yeah, just curious to know what that process was like.
Yeah, and yeah, maybe this feeds back into that fundraising structure as well. Is that I was a first time founder of a tech company. Like I'd built the agency and had a couple other things that I played around with in between that I'd flipped and sold and done okay out of. But this was like the first tech company that I ran, and so the structure there was I was a solo founder, which is one thing in its own right. We ran a fully remote team because that was kind of just the way that felt advantageous to us at the time. So like you mentioned, we had 20 people in the team. Yeah, we did. But a lot of that was based in the Philippines as like customer service staff and even like we built like a sales force in the Philippines that helped us grow, helped us kind of reach out to customers in all these clever different ways. And kind of introduce us well. And that worked. It worked really well. But we were running around with like such like a bottom heavy business. It was me at the top. There was like just way too much of a gap to this really great team, but they weren't co-founders. They weren't involved in that same way. And then we had this really heavy kind of team at the bottom that were brilliant, beautiful people that I loved working with, but we kind of got ourselves to a point where it like solo founding is really, really hard. And I think that there's a reason why there's the perfect structure for early stage investors to see that there's a team of people who have been through the wars together and know how to make decisions together and know how to thrash things out without getting each other offside and all those kind of things. So for me, I think it was set up in a certain way which the highs were super high and the lows were super low because there's no one else to talk to about it. Like it really does like tie a hand behind your back, and that whole thing of but I own 80% of the company is great, right? Well, yeah, it's great, but that whole 80% of something, that 80% of nothing versus 40% of something else, and find yourself a co-founder. And again, it's so difficult. And I tried to retrospectively find the right kind of co-founder to come into the business. It was kind of almost like too late in that way. And so yeah, it was I'm pretty matter of fact about these kind of things, and a lot of it worked, and a lot of it just didn't work. And I think just not quite enough things worked. I still strongly believe that someone will build a really big business in that like collaborative marketing space. It wasn't me, and there's others out there that have fallen by the wayside as well. And there's new people going into that space. I spoke to a founder this last week who's doing something very similar, and wanted some advice. And I don't have all the answers, but I'm happy to share what went wrong for us. So yeah, I think like shutting something down and making that decision, again, it's harder when you're a solo founder because you don't have someone else there with you making that call, and you can kind of wear the cost, and you can say, yeah, but like I'm going to drop my salary down to this and work these things out. But I think that's again the value of having someone else next to you.
And did you kind of at that time know that you were going to move on to something else, or was it just like an independent decision to move off of AppJar?
Yeah, I think independent decision. I think it was one of those things of that the capital was clearly on a trajectory where we needed to fundraise again. And I was clearing through some stuff the other day, just making sure that I didn't have too much stuff on my laptop. I had a dream that my laptop got stolen or something, and it was like, yeah, that's a dream that you wake up out of and you move everything to the cloud. But yeah, I stumbled across an old deck that was like, this is the Series A deck for the last business. And yeah, it was one of those things of like, I kind of tried to get us there, and we clearly just didn't have the metrics to do it. And so, right? I think that it's clear sometimes when something isn't going to work out like that. And I think you need to be really honest with yourself. And again, the value of having people around you. And it doesn't have to be a co-founder, right? It could be an advisor, close friends, other founders who have gone through things. It's like if you laid it all bare and showed them what the facts were in that instance, everyone would have said, look, have a really hard swing at something here to see if you can Hail Mary it. But otherwise, you don't want to be that guy who's just gone all the way down and worked yourself down to a point where there's $1 left in the bank account and you're just out of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, like, again, maybe for the listeners of the show, it might be useful for them to kind of hear that co-founding, like finding that co-founder journey from your perspective around 1FF, because obviously we get to kind of talk about that a little bit, and everyone kind of talks about the need to find a co-founder, but it's hard to kind of dive into the practicalities. But maybe do you want to talk a little bit about what that what that sort of process was like for you, for us to like end up co-founding that business together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the co-founder search is one of those things where it's so important to get it right that if you spend you can kind of try to be absolutely perfect on it, but you might end up not getting what is perfect for you. Like the most often like kind of asked question that you hear is, oh, does anyone know a technical co-founder? Like someone who could be my technical co-founder? It's just such a common question. And I think that as much of a systems fit, I really think you need a cultural fit of someone who can, again, from my side, it's share some personality in terms of being able to roll with the punches. It's someone who wants to pull out the books on a Saturday and try to work things out and try to dig deep into into an evening, or just have really smart, intelligent, honest conversations all the time. For me, it was a case of there was a couple of people that I talked to previously about like this is what I was planning on doing when the initial idea for One Future Football came together, and various reasons, right? Everyone's in a very different boat, and so what you find as a founder is that sometimes you're lucky enough to be in a position of, look, I can roll without a salary for a certain period of time, but it doesn't mean the other person can, right? So I think I had a few people that I was friendly with, that we kind of played around with this, but it was very obvious that they weren't going to be the right kind of co-founder fit. And then what you do is you make a list, right? You look at it and say, who else is out there that I know, like run through LinkedIn and be like, would that work? Like, would that person be in the right spot? And you just, again, you don't know. So I think the thing is that you're better off just having more conversations and just seeing where things get to. And so the story for all the listeners out there is that I hit Ro up and said, hey, like, you look through LinkedIn again, and it's like, what is Ro? Like, Ro's really into football, like clearly very into football. He's working at AWS. He's got his podcast. Like, I know that he's run his marketing agency before. He's worked in tech before. He knows like the fashion world a ton. Like, he'd be amazing. Like, again, make a phone call. Like, you don't know. So there's a lot of factors in there that are great, and then there's like big blockers of, yeah, but he likes getting paid X amount of dollars a month to do the job that he's currently doing. So what I did is I messaged Ro and said, hey, I'm like planning on working on something new. I would just love your opinion on it. Again, like, I had such an agenda behind the scenes, and my agenda was, and it played out kind of how I wanted to, sort of, in that I was like, I'll just put it to him. I think as a football guy, he's going to really like this. He's going to really like what we're talking about here, and like the tech crossover and the fashion stuff. I think it's just going to work. Whether or not you're going to be in a position to want to be a part of it or not, who knows? But I think you throw it out there, and it might be that your second or third degree of connection was going to then be the right person. So yeah, Ro and I had a phone call, and like I sat here and pitched the business to you, shared the whole thing, and at the end was like, look, I don't want to offend you with this, but if you were ever interested in being a part of this business and like coming on and co-founding it with me, I think this would be awesome. And maybe I'll hand back to you you can tell people what you said and then what happened next.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that you played it perfectly, because I had no idea that was your hidden agenda through that. Yeah, I mean, I remember getting that email, and I was like, obviously I'd known you for a couple of years, and you'd mentioned something in sports. And to be honest, and this is actually a lot of the reaction that I get when I give the 1FF pitch to other people, which is just like, I was not expecting this at all when someone says a sports tech idea. And I remember hearing it and just like you said, like just hit so many of my kind of sweet spots of like startups, just investment, like everything that I could have kind of imagined. And I thought that the context of the conversation was around investment. So I thought that you were looking to fundraise, and you'd sort of heard about the angel network that I was kind of pulling together at that time. And then when you told me that you're looking for a co-founder, my first reaction was like, I remember saying this to you as well, was like, oh, that's very generous and very thoughtful for you to think about me, but like this is not on the roadmap at all. Like I had a very clear plan after I left AWS of going full-time on the podcast and launching this angel network and all of those sort of things. And I think you remembered, I remember you saying like, just take a couple of days to think about it and we'll have another chat. And I just went away and couldn't stop thinking about this at all. And, I think it's very rare for me anyways to find something that, is like so perfectly aligned, and something that, I think again, I'd be curious to get your perspective, but I think having gone through that startup journey years ago with Stage Label, I was always open to doing something again, but knowing how difficult and all-encompassing it is, I was like, I don't want to do this just for an idea or just because I wanted to found a company again. It really had to be the right thing. And yeah, this kind of hit like everything that I could have imagined and more in terms of just the vision and what we were trying to do. And so I think like 2 or 3 days later, I was like, screw it, let's do this. And I guess that's how the journey started.
Yeah, there's a quote I always remember. It was actually Sam Wong who said to me at one point, it's like Blackbird invests in people that are doing their life's work. And I think that's just it's become something which is now just a really core tenet of what they do and how they make their decisions. The hard thing is you don't know you're doing it. You don't know that you're not doing your life's work until you find your life's work. And so, I thought that even with AmpJar that I was doing my life's work, that was like, love small businesses, love connecting them, like love the idea of working with them and supporting them and all that stuff. But then you find something which really feels like it's your life's work. I mean, maybe there's something else out there that actually is our life's work, but I'm pretty sure it's this. And so, yeah, it's kind of, I think that then really helped with the fundraising process from there as well.
Yeah, and totally. Like, we'll obviously get into the fundraising. I had a friend of mine from high school who shared a document with me from grade 10 from Canberra Grammar School, where we didn't have a football competition. And so I decided to create one for our school. And there's this document that outlines the fixtures and the teachers that I'd convinced to referee matches and all of those sort of things. And he's like, oh, it's hilarious that you get to do that now, especially as I'm putting together fixtures for season 1 and all of those sort of things. But yeah, like you said, like in terms of, having something that kind of definitely feels like your life's work, I think when you're all in on a startup, it can definitely feel like that. But when you find something that is actually those things, it's for me personally, like it's just crazy how different it feels in terms of the journey. But you touched on the fundraising aspect. So I guess you want to maybe dive into a little bit of what that sort of fundraising journey is like and the types of people who have kind of gotten involved and I guess some of the lessons for founders who are going through that process at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had probably 2 very early conversations, which was with a fund locally that had invested in an international business in the football tech space that we went to speak to. And I remember we were kind of showed them the story, went to their office, showed them the story, and I'll bleep myself here, but one of the guys was saying as we were left the boardroom, was like just walking out to the exit afterwards. He's like, I was thinking, just like beep off. There's absolutely no way. And then he's like, as you were going through the whole story of what you're planning on doing and how you're going to do it, he's like, I was just getting more and more and more on board with everything as you were explaining. But I think in many ways that initial reaction is like was a challenge for us to kind of get past. Then we had another conversation with the infamous Rain Ong, and he said, again, I love it. This is, I don't want to paraphrase him, right? But he loved it and really liked the idea for a lot of reasons. I'll let him fill the different quotes out if he remembers it. But then he said, have you spoken to Nikki yet? And we said no. And so he just connected us up with Nikki very quickly at Blackbird. At the same time, we were then just very rapidly expanding out our list of who else we wanted to speak with, and got in touch with some of the very, very big funds in Silicon Valley and Menlo Park kind of area. And yeah, we started the process of talking to, some of those top top 3, 4, 5 kind of firms over there, and was just running as fast as we could with all these meetings that we were doing at, being an Aussie, like whatever time of day, we're doing all these crazy calls. And maybe the other wave of funds that we were talking to was because of the timing of it. When we were doing this about a year ago, maybe just under a year ago, there was a lot of frothiness around like Web3 investing. And so as we spoke to a few people, they were saying, "Oh, look, would you make this an NFT? Would you like turn this into a DAO? Would you do these things?" And again, because the market was where it was like, look, we're not like 100% against it. We don't want to pin all of our hopes on these teams working as DAOs, because I don't know, we're not quite sure that we've seen a good example of that working anywhere. And then because of some of these funds and even some of the big guys out in Silicon Valley, because of their remit and what their fund was built for, a lot of them were saying, look, we would need it to be this. We would need it to be that you NFT everything, that you tokenize everything, that you would turn everything into a DAO. And we had to make some decisions on those things of saying, look, we're just not going to do that. We're not going to bet the farm on that. So then it very quickly happened that all the funds that we were talking to kind of in Hong Kong and Singapore, and all those ones that were all big, like crypto-y kind of funds, they all just went very, very quiet very quickly as things started to like absolutely fall out of their world. And yeah, long story short, we had Blackbird came in and said, we want to do this. And they were clearly our number one choice. And even just working with Nikki and Nick Crocker and everyone that we've spoken with there, Max and the team, like it feels like such the right people to work with, and they were always our number one choice, as I mentioned. And then it was a case of trying to squeeze in everyone else into the rest of the round. We decided how much we wanted to raise, and we kind of set that as a hard figure, and we'll only raise this much at this much. And so we had to say no to a couple of big checks, like $1 million US check from a fund which would have been nice to have around, but we just didn't have the room. And another fund that wanted to put in €1 million that was again in that sports world that would have been useful. But again, we just had to try to set some structure and limit and say, this is how it's going to be. That's how far we're willing to go. And yeah, that was kind of how it all came together.
I think it's a point to kind of double click on, which is, I would say like we were in a relatively privileged position where, we did get to say no to a couple of funds, which obviously not everyone is in a position to do so. But I think one of the big, I remember us having like this big strategic conversation of like, how deep into Web3 do we want to make this? Obviously I think you and I were very aligned in how we saw that. And I think from day one, we kind of said we're Web 2.5 at best with a lot of this. But, talking to a lot of funds, which, to be honest, come with a lot of like brand cloud and, the right type of like door openings, but means you're building a very different type of company was, I think, a key decision-making point for us, and something that we just didn't feel, like you said, comfortable betting the farm on. And I think it's a really important point for founders as well, that as you're going through the fundraising process, it is hard and it is a slog. And, when someone says they're willing to write a check, like that's huge. But I think you also have to be just very mindful of the long-term impacts of that. And is that, exactly what you were saying about accelerators as well, is like, understanding what you're trying to achieve, and is this going to be the right path, the right partner for you to do that with. I guess it was a little bit clearer for us because it was more of a technology and a very specific play. But I guess any advice to founders on that as they're kind of having conversations with investors in terms of how to tease that out?
I mean, I think the one message we got was, look, you're going to want to take the money because you're never going to have too much. And like in hindsight, I definitely understand what they mean by that, because like an extra 250k here or an extra 500k there would be very useful. But I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere, and I think that it's right to be principled and right to structure that up and try to make the right decisions early. Again, this is where independent advice will help, depending on what experience you have in your team. But being able to say, say to someone else, like, this is what we're thinking. How do you think we should go with this? Like, what makes most sense to you? That's really helpful. And again, that's the benefit of having a co-founder who knows the world as well. So for us to be able to thrash those things out, I think makes the most sense. Look, I think as well, when you've got the right lead investor comes in, kind of all your problems are solved then, right? We as soon as that landed, everyone fell into line very, very quickly. We had a few that were already sorted out before that check was sorted out, but the benefit then, and it's probably too easy to say, it's like, oh, you go sort out your lead investor and then everything else will be right, because that is really all you need. But then you can talk to them and say, all right, this is what we're thinking. What do you think? And you're a business partner at that point. And so you do get to lean on them to get that experience. But yeah, having that, I think talk it out, find your friendly people in the community that will help you with that, and try to make that decision and stick by it.
One of the big decisions for us after the fundraising was, do we announce this or not? So, at that time it was primarily the two of us. I think we'd made an agreement on our first hire who was going to come in at that point, obviously kind of pending signatures, and it was an incredible first hire, Carl, to bring him onto the team. But yeah, I guess, and that's been a question from a lot of people as well, as I've kind of had private conversations about telling them about 1FF over the last year or so. Again, do you want to maybe kind of share some thinking on like decision to be stealth versus like coming out publicly, and what that would have meant for us at that time?
Yeah, everything is right, but purely a business decision of how does this help us with our go-to-market and with somewhat protecting the area that we're going into. So what we're building is pretty different. And when we speak with people in very large experienced and very small experienced companies in the UK and in the US and all around the world, we keep on hearing like, wow, I've never heard that before. That's totally different. I can absolutely see why you're doing it, where it goes. And for us, it was, we wanted to spend time to get it right. And yeah, it was one of those things where it's not that hard to build in stealth. I don't think there's there was not really a downside of, like, if we came out, say, last November and said, this is what One Future Football is, and we're going to be launching something in 6 months' time or around that, then I think that the audience that we're talking to, like our audience is typically like Gen Z is like as our focus audience. There's no upside for them as the highly patient people that they are to be told that, in 6 months' time this whole thing's going to be launching. That doesn't do anything for them. So and given the complexity of what we're building from a storytelling perspective, it felt like we couldn't kind of launch with a thin edge of a wedge, because the whole experience comes from the whole experience, not from, oh yeah, let's just launch with this little bit over here, because so much of why that part matters is dependent on everything else that's built into the business.
I agree. And to be honest, I've actually loved building in stealth. There are no distractions around particular things as well, and we can just kind of just be heads down and be really focused on what we've been building. And it's incredible what the team has built. I think the one trade-off for us that we were potentially contemplating around making an announcement was what that would mean from a hiring perspective, because, as you said, there are just so many different moving parts of this, and the level of depth that we needed to get this to for launch there's just a lot that's kind of involved. And I think that was probably the one thing that I think would have made us say, okay, makes sense for us to come out and do something a little bit earlier if it meant that we could hire the right team. I think we've just been very fortunate through our networks and through just people that we know or people that we've both worked with previously to just bring on an absolutely stellar team. And what that's meant is that, like you said, we can make that really big strategic decision and time that announcement right when we've got something to show, and can be really advantageous to us from a go-to-market perspective, without having that trade-off of not really being able to have the right team in place to execute on that.
Yeah. And the hiring process, I think, was, again, your strength of having a community around you and having your channels was really important in that. And even parts of my background led to individual hires. I think if I'm not wrong, Carl, who's our head of data science, came from someone who was working at a charity that I chair the board of, and her partner was someone who was a potential engineering hire, who then recommended that we talk to Carl about a totally different part of this. So it's not that everyone you hire will be a first degree of connection. That was like a third degree of connection to someone who, like, that only happened because we found the right way to have that conversation, and then had that right conversation, and everything just flows from there. So it's building in stealth, I think, is easier if you do come with a decent local, like, loaded connection list and little black book of names and contacts and all that stuff that will help you to find the team that you need to build.
It's funny now because obviously the team that we've built is incredible, but like, just now taking a moment to kind of reflect back, it's still a process to try and convince people to join. Like, I remember those sort of early conversations with Carl when, again, it was just like the three of us in a co-working space in Carlton, having a chat in one of the boardrooms and kind of laying everything out and talking about how we saw things working and how he saw things working and all of that. But yeah, we'll use Carl as an example because we've kind of referenced him a few times, but obviously 2 young kids, had been at Champion Data for 15 years. To be honest, had all the reasons not to join and kind of continue on with things, but obviously made what we all think is obviously like a great and really important decision for all of us, and hopefully something that we can all really grateful for all of these sort of things and all of that down the line. But it is hard, like, whether you've kind of even after fundraising to try and convince people. What are some of the levers that you think that founders should think of around those sort of things, and what are like the most important things that you can get across to someone to try and convince them to take a punt as much as an investor in betting their career on coming and joining you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bigger decision than an investor in almost every way, because you're saying, this is my full time, I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing over here. It's quite a buoyant market right now. Like, we were trying to find the right social media hire recently, like to join in with a guy called Joe who runs that side of things. We were looking for someone to join his team as like a creative social media role. And we went through like the football club networks and the AFL and like tried to find the right people through that kind of area. But again, everyone's so happy with what they're doing in so many ways, because it's just one of those frothy employment markets with people in sport, like, typically doing what they want to do. I think the thing that helped us with that was just being there at the right time, right place. As someone who had worked with our agency previously and was just working for a company that just was in the housing sector that just flipped overnight, and so she was kind of ready, and we made things happen within 48 hours of her being told that their company was shutting down. I think that the biggest lever, the biggest single lever, is showing someone how much creative opportunity they have to do something very, very different. So in our world, just like thinking around the office, we've probably got about 50% of people who are really into football and 50% who are not at all into football. And so the football people may be a slightly easier hire, because we can say, this is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to control your career and how you're going to be able to do this. The non-football people, I think you need to find what creatively is really interesting for them, that will give them scope to do something which is, it doesn't matter that it's football to them. And so give them something that allows them to feel like all their creative opportunity itches are being scratched by these roles. So for someone to come in and do what Jody, our head of design, is doing, or Sarita, like one of our front end engineers, like what she's doing, it gives us a like, this is what you can do. This is the time frame. Like, we've got this much capital. We're well back to this point, so we'll be able to do something. We're not falling over anytime soon. You've got this much room to do something, and we want you to just creatively roll with that. Like, own it, take it the direction that you want to take it. I think that's really important, and I find it hard to know how impactful like an ESOP is. I just don't know. I think it's really important to involve the whole team in equity and give everybody some upside on that side of things. How important it is, it's hard because I've never A/B tested it. We've never like tried to hire someone and said, right, we're not going to give you anything, but everyone else gets something. We've not done that. So I think I would just make sure it's part of the roadmap of like, yeah, let's have a equity share option pool for the employees, and give them a way that they can own a piece of the company as well, and be involved on that side.
Yeah. And I think, especially for early stage companies, I think it takes a very particular type of person to want to join, because there are so many different moving parts of it. And I think, everyone's different and got different sort of lifestyles and different things that they sort of look for. But I think if you're joining an early stage company, you're looking for, like you said, something super creative, an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to kind of like make your mark on things. And I think that like one of the big things that we were able to paint with 1FF was just the very big vision behind this, and like the opportunity to like go, here's how we kind of envision this, but there are so many ways for you to kind of take this on board and shape this in your own way, that I think is like attracts the right type of people. But I would also say, working so closely with you, one of like what I would describe as your superpowers as a founder has been like your very clear vision of the company as well as the product. And I'm just curious to know, like, is that something that's kind of always been there and been there through like AmpJar journey as well? Like, is that inherently built, or is that something that you've kind of like worked on and developed over time?
Good question. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it's great to hear you say that. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I think when you, maybe it's part of that like life's work thing again, is like when we've looked at this stuff together, I think that it's very rare that we've ever said, oh, my vision is X and yours is Y, and they're a long way apart. Like, I don't think it happens that way. I think that when it just feels like it's obvious to both of us with this. I think with AmpJar, probably pretty true early on, but again, maybe as things start to get tougher, it's harder to retain that conviction of exactly where you want to go and what you want to do, and making those right calls. So again, I think it comes down to just having a really clear drive around this being the thing that you want to achieve, and that, when we talk about like clear vision, I think that the most important part of that in my mind is having something that is right, because that's how it's going to succeed. Like, there's lots of ways that businesses will fail, and in my mind, one way that this business would not work is if we don't deliver on the vision that you and I both have. If we can deliver on the vision, I think this flies and becomes something brilliant. If we have to compromise too much along that way, that would damage what we're trying to do, in my mind.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think it's kind of like almost separating out, and I think you're really good at this as well, of just looking at the fundamentals of this and going like, what is actually critically important for the business. I think that from my perspective, thinking back to a year ago, getting ready to launch now, if I've sort of forward projected and said like, this is ideally where I would like the business to be, I think in so many areas of the business, we're so far beyond what I thought we would even be able to do, and like the level of depth that we have on different parts of the business has just been like incredible to watch, our kind of team pulling that together. But yeah, I think, like you said, I think the fundamentals of where this needs to be heading directionally and who it's for and all of those sort of things at the core, how you like the specific minutia of like decisions that you kind of make can evolve, and hopefully you're bringing on the right people that you trust to make the right decisions as part of that process and to elevate thinking in particular areas. But I think it's so important to get that like vision up front right, versus I guess just not being as clear, because I think that just makes it a little bit more difficult for everyone.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because I think there's something in there that, even if you go back to our head of data science, like we've gone together and said, like, this is our vision for how we think that this part of the business should operate, but we don't know as much as you do around this. If minimally you can deliver on this, and this is why we want this to be this way, like this is what we want to achieve, this is how we think we get there. But if you can find that way to get to that end point of this being the end goal of what we're trying to achieve, you can work out how you want to get there. And if you slightly change what we want to achieve because of what the methodology that you've used, then great. And even on, designing shirts, let's say all the different teams have shirts that we've designed and have gone through quite the process with Jody to get all of those right. But I think a lot of the time we sometimes give her not enough of a brief on those shirt designs, and other times we give her way too much of a brief and say it has to be this, it has to be this. But ultimately, I think that she does her best work when we can say, we can really clearly say, this is again what we want to achieve, not what I want it to look like, not it has to be this, it has to be that, but this is what we want to achieve, which is, for the shirts, is something that it breaks the mold of a football shirt. It does something very different that any other football teams around the world could do. It's the kind of shirt that Liverpool wouldn't be able to create for these very specific reasons. Like that's what, and so rather than us saying this is exactly what this has to be, I think you have to rationalize, like, this is why I want it to be this, but whatever this is can change as long as it still meets these objectives.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And, again, part of that kind of comes back to hiring the right team as well. We've been, it's interesting that you kind of mentioned your journey with Amchar of like feeling that was very bottom heavy. Like I feel like for us, it's been, I think we've hired very senior people from day one into different areas of the business, and just, again, like you said, like setting that vision and letting them sort of paint around that to work out the best way to achieve the objectives that we want. I guess a big part of that as well has been the decision very early on, and again, I think we were super aligned on this, of remote versus being in an office. I think both of us are very clear about the importance of being in the same place and being in the same room and being able to tap each other on the shoulder, but also what comes with that of just speed of market and just depth of those sort of things. But I remember we had one of our investors bringing in their portfolio into our office for breakfast a couple of weeks ago, and speaking to some of the other founders, they're going, yeah, we've kind of built a remote first company, like really curious to know why you've kind of gone down that path. So again, for the benefit of the founders listening, do you want to maybe share some of our thinking in terms of why we decided to go down that path versus going remote?
Yeah, I think there's two factors. One is a way of timing. So we kind of came off the back of COVID. We weren't going through that, and we weren't stuck in a world of, okay, we can't really come into the office at these times, we can't really do that, and so in that world, the easiest thing is to say you do your own thing, and it typically it's going to land on remote being the easiest way to go. I think that the bigger point, though, is that analogy that you might have all heard of if someone entered your market tomorrow and there was a team of 10 people and there's three scenarios, which one would scare you the most? It's like, one, they're fully remote. Two, they come into the office a couple of days a week. Or three, they're in the office 5 days, working together, clearing all the problems, working everything out, strategizing together. And clearly it's the third one for me. Like for me, I think we look at that and say, that's how you can be most dangerous. And I feel like we make on any given day, like 20, 30 decisions together. And they're big decisions that we're making. Some of them are obviously small decisions, right? But we're making decisions every single day. And so for us to do that proximity piece is so critical. And you can click to huddle someone on Slack, or you could just send a Zoom link and say, hey, have you got 5 minutes and that stuff. But it's that serendipitous conversation that you can have in over lunch, like when you see a video pop up somewhere and sharing it with someone in the office, and it just like triggers something. I think that it's critical for me to be able to spend time together, getting it right together. Now the overlay to that is we have like I have like 8-year-old twin girls, and other people in the office have children, and people in the office have pets that have been used to them being home through COVID, and some people live close, some people live far away. You need to give people the flexibility. So our policy is you're big enough and old enough to run your own show, right? You work out where you want to be, and everyone's in the office almost all the time because they know that that's the right way for them to be as effective as they possibly can be. Every now and again, you or I will say, look, it's just stuff happening, and I've been doing calls all morning from 5 o'clock talking to East Coast US or whatever, and it's now 9 and there's no way I'm getting to the office in the next little while, so I'm going to work from home for the morning or all day or whatever it might be. And you build that culture that allows people to feel that way, because there's benefits of working from home. The work from home benefit of I get to be in my children's lives and pick them up from school every now and again. I get to do a doctor's appointment at a convenient time of day. Like one of my guys took their child to an appointment the other day that they were otherwise going to have to do it in November. And so for them to be able to say, I'm out to do this thing, again, they don't need to tell us. They're big enough and senior enough and old enough to make those decisions together of their own volition. So I think it's important to build that culture right. But the best part of it is that the culture seems to lean towards everyone sees the value of whenever we're spending time together, we just make the best decisions.
Yeah. And I think even just having a line in the sand of, our intention is to be in the office as much as possible. And even the way that we chose the location of our office and all of those sort of things was like, how do we remove the friction for people as much as possible to do that? But then also, I think it's also a self-filtering process as well for people, which is, is this the right type of company that I want to join because it aligns with how I want to work and what I enjoy doing? I think a lot of our hires, if, I remember speaking to them about it, and they said that their preference was to come in and work because where they worked previously, it was a little bit too remote and they didn't feel as connected or weren't able to do the things that they wanted to do. And so, I think either way, whatever decision founders come to, and it's different for every company, but it's sometimes helpful to kind of draw a line in the sand and say, this is our preference or this is where we stand on things, because it just kind of helps align that culture as much as possible versus just trying to get people across the line and all of those sort of things which might not align and makes things, difficult and not so much of a right fit for the company or for that person that you're bringing onto the team as well.
Yeah, I think that the point you make about the office location thing was really deliberate from us as well. So, for your listeners who aren't in Melbourne, there's typically a couple of hubs of where startups are, which is around Richmond, Cremorne kind of area, which is how far away that is from the city, but let's say it's a train stop or two from the city, or you could maybe walk it in 45 minutes, something like that, to the CBD. And Collingwood, which is there's lots of startups and now growth stage businesses there as well, which is probably just a little closer, but it's another direction out of the city. The problem with putting an office in Cremorne or in Collingwood is that you could draw a map of Melbourne and say if people came from this side of the city, they were going to have to go into the city and then out to get to the office. They got to go from here to here. They got to go here to here. By putting an office right in the middle of the city where we are, you can grab a train, a tram, a bus, you can bike, you can walk, you can do whatever, and it's one step to get in. So we've got someone who lives out near Melton. I ride my bike from Coburg. You typically grab a tram from from your part of the world in South Yarra. So everyone's got their own one step to get into the city. I think if it was that step in, step out, it just adds an extra half an hour on either end of your day, or maybe 20 minutes of being dramatic, right? But that extra little bit of effort, I think it just makes it so easy by just saying we're right here, and again, something you can't A/B test, but it'd be so fascinating to see if we'd run the same policy, the same structure, the same everything, and put this business in Cremorne or in Collingwood. How would that have changed things? What would that behaviour have been from the team?
Pete, obviously we can kind of talk for hours about this, but maybe to wrap up, what's the vision behind 1FF for you?
Yeah, One Future Football is a new global football league designed for this young generation of fans coming through. So the incredible growth of the Premier League and the way that the Premier League is now dominating in all areas of global football audience is brilliant in many ways for a lot of people, but creates a lot of pain points for others and often dilutes the product in a local market. So 2 million people got to go to a Premier League football match last season, like walked through the turnstiles, found their seat and cheered on inside the stadium. But 2 billion people watched from somewhere else. So with One Future Football, we're building specifically for that 2 billion people first. So we're creating this league that has all these different new ways of fans are able to be involved, that we believe totally revitalizes, revamps, re-energizes the way that people can engage with football. It's still a lean back product. It's still a product where you watch matches on a screen the same way that you would watch the Premier League on a screen. But we have all these exciting, fun, interesting new ways that fans can be involved. And so those, to give you a little bit more context, I would say that maybe the first thing I'd say is that there's teams in 12 countries. So we've picked these 12 different markets around the world where we've established football teams. We've then created 252 players. Because the big difference here is that we aren't playing football physically inside stadia. Instead, we've built out these players that look as close as you can imagine to a real living, walking, talking person. We just get to do, because they're not a real person, we get to do really, really interesting things with their intellectual property, with their careers, with their storylines, with their lives, with their content and everything else that you could think around a player. One Future footballer has a variety of lived experiences that create connection with fans all over the world. Our footballers have come from 88 different countries. They have lived experiences in areas of like, we have players who are refugees, we have players with different sexualities, we have players that are on the autism spectrum or are anaphylactic or diabetic. We have players that come from very privileged backgrounds. We have players that have grown up in different places like Lagos or South London or those kind of places and have lived the life of a young football fan in those markets. So for us, we take those players and they are the athletes that play for these teams. So our season works the same way that any other football season works. Every team plays each other home and away, and we've got a final series at the end of it. But we use a very, very smart data science-led AI engine to essentially build out these results. So our job is to surface everything up. We don't know the results until they happen. We don't control the results in any way. Our job is to surface this up and bring this new breed of football out to fans in all these 12 markets and basically all around the world.
And obviously, if there are any football fans at all out there, we'd love for you to check out 1FF. As Pete mentioned, that we've created so many different ways for fans to engage with the sport that they love, and to a degree, as football fans for over 25 years ourselves, kind of trying to create a product that we wish sort of existed for ourselves growing up. Pete, on that note, mate, it's been a pleasure having you on. I'll see you in the office tomorrow. But for anyone listening who wants to find out more, say hello, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, just 1ff.com is where everything happens. I'm not huge on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. Maybe it's the easiest. But yeah, go to 1ff.com, see what you can find, see what you can learn. And yeah, we hope you love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make sure I put all those links in the show notes. Pete, once again, thanks for coming on, mate.
Thanks, Ro. See you tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to episode 170 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this interview will be available at startupplaybook.co. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.